Tic-Tac-Toe in vanilla JavaScript. Here's what we're going to build today. It's a rather skeletal, functional design. There's not much CSS. You could apply that later. We have the ability to click on squares, and we keep track of whose turn it is. And as soon as someone gets 3 in a row, we highlight a win, and we say they won the game. We've got a reset button, and we can play again, and we can check wins in that direction, and there's going to be wins vertically. And let's just do this once more to prove. Prove that we can check O's as well. So I'm going to show you how to create this HTML structure and add a little bit of CSS to get this grid design. And then I'm going to show you how to use JavaScript to attach clicks to some JavaScript that is going to keep track of tic-tac-toe. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to write an algorithm to detect those wins. Let's get into it. Here's some things that are going to be helpful to know. You should have a good idea of generic functions in JavaScript, parameters, return values. You should know something about arrays, how to access them. There's one function on an array called shift, which moves something off the front of the array, which is useful. You should be familiar with iterating with a for loop to go over a one-dimensional array. And we're going to use two-dimensional arrays with a nested for loop. And here's another way to do a for loop. We're going to have a regular for loop with I set to a number and increment I. Every now and then you'll see this sort of for of loop, which automatically feeds the contents of an array into a variable. You should have some understanding of classes, where we can create a class with attributes and create an instance of that class using the new keyword. And we're going to add some methods. So we're going to use a class to keep track of the state of a tic-tac-toe game. You should also know just a little bit about HTML and JavaScript and the DOM methods. For instance, if we have a DOM element on the page, we're going to manipulate the text content property. And a useful property that exists on elements is something called class list. So this gives us a good way to add classes or remove classes from an element. You'll see that when we add the styling for the win line. We're going to do something with this DOM content loaded event. We use that just to wait until the page is loaded to start setting things up. And you should know how to get a reference to something by its ID or get a reference to things by a class name. Notice this final note here. If you get reference to elements by their class name, you get a list of things back, but the list is actually of a certain type called an HTML collection, which is not an array. So we're going to use this syntax where we do ... to spread out that list of the HTML collection into an array, and that gives us access to this shift function. Anyways, that's just some stuff that's good to know. Look into that stuff more if you ever get confused about what's going on in this lesson. So, just to show you what we're doing, we're going to make a HTML structure for the grid. We're going to apply some CSS to it. Then we're going to click on the cells and make sure we can have things run in JavaScript. We're going to use JavaScript to build a tic-tac-toe engine, so keeping track of the game, keeping track of whose turn it is, and checking for wins. And then we're going to connect the HTML with these click listeners to this JavaScript engine. This rant about redundancy. At the very end, I've just got something goofy to say. So, let's start making our basic structure. We're going to use a grid, and we're going to use divs. You might feel like a table is a good thing to use because a table is going to give us a grid-like structure, but we're going to see that it's just not necessary. We're going to have a div dedicated to showing messages. So here we've got this prompt that says it's X's turn or the game is over. And we're going to put underscores in each of these divs for the cells. So we're going to have 3 boxes here, and those are in a div. And then we've got another 3 boxes and another div and another 3. So you can see we've got 3 rows and 3 boxes. We'll attach click listeners to this and maybe attach some fancy CSS in the end. Let me go ahead and create a new directory. I'm going to call this Tic-Tac-Toe. And I'm going to, you know what, let's open this directory. Tic-Tac-Toe. And I'm going to open that in VS Code as well. Sorry, I should change into that directory and then open that in VS Code. I'm going to make a few files. I'm going to make a file for our HTML. I'm going to make a file for our JavaScript, and I make a file for our CSS. In the index file, VS Code gives us a shortcut here. We can write HTML5, and it gives us a little template. I'm going to call this Tic-Tac-Toe. And in the body, we can say Tic-Tac-Toe. And now we need some of these divs for like the prompt where the message is. It's going to start saying X's turn. And I'm going to make this div and call it, give it an ID of Tic-Tac-Toe board. And we're going to make some divs in here where I'm going to call this a cell. And we can copy this and paste it. So this is going to give us our overall grid structure. Let's go ahead and add a link to another file. We're going to link up this CSS file. The reference to that file, it exists at style.css, and the relationship is it is a style sheet. And let's see, while we're attaching files, we're going to need a source file, actually script. The source is main.js. And in this CSS file, I want to say, let's get these cells and give them a width and a height and a border of a solid black 1 pixel border. Let's look at these side by side. So now we can come back here and open this in Chrome. If we look at this, this doesn't totally look like a grid structure yet, and we need to do a few more things. So right now, the default way that divs display is they display and they take up an entire row. So we need to give some styling to have these display different. And I think what we need to do is have it be inline flex. If we give it an inline flex, now we see that each of these cells can display in the same line as something. And I've got my CSS written up over here. So let's put a little bit of a margin between these things. And this align item center and justify content center, that's going to make the text appear in the center of the box. So here in the solution, we've got the underscore appearing in the exact center of the squares. Right now, it appears up here, kind of the top left, like default place for text. If we add a margin here, that gives us a better space between all these boxes. And let's see, I think we want to say justify content center. And what was the other one? I think it's going to be align items center. If we do both of those, that fixes the text in the center of the box. So this is the basic structure of this page. Oh, I'm also remembering that we want to have a button here. And the button is to reset the game. I'm going to give it an ID of reset. And in order to get the message to appear in a certain place, I'm going to change the prompt so the prompt is in a span here. So now we have a button and the actual text there. So, here's two more things we can do to make this look a little bit better. This is going to change the mouse cursor to be a pointer when you hover over a square. Instead of like looking at a mouse, it's going to look like a finger. And this is some CSS that will prevent some weird text highlighting. So right now, if we click on things, well, nothing happens because we don't have any JavaScript set up. But one thing we can do is we can say when the cursor hovers over a cell, let me refresh, now it turns into this finger. So to me, that indicates that this can be clicked on. And then as soon as you start clicking on stuff, if you click like too much, you get this text highlighting. So I don't like the way that looks. That's why I have this here. I'm going to say if we have a cell and it has text selected, let's make the color of that transparent. I don't know if we need that black thing, actually. 0, 0, 0 being black. So now on this page, we can still select this if anyone ever wanted to copy and paste tic-tac-toe text. And, oh, what? Maybe we need to say this. Well, I'm not sure. There we go. If we just have it be selection, well, that blocks selection everywhere on the page. I don't like that you can't select text up here. Maybe what we can use is we can say if you're inside the tic-tac-toe board, don't select stuff there. So we can select stuff here. There we go. So we're preventing text selection for anything under the tic-tac-toe board itself. So now let's add some clicking. In order to click on cells, we need to use a event listener for clicking. The main idea here is that we're going to query for the cells using document get elements by class name, the cell, and then we're going to use a double nested for loop to go through rows and columns. And as we go through that, we're going to use this shift property off a array to pluck off the first thing in the array. And now we can say, actually, this shouldn't be document. This should say cell. Let me fix that. But if you click on one of those cells, we're going to have a function, and that function receives the cell and the row and the column number. And we're going to change the text on that cell to show the row and the column. So let's hook this up. It's proper in JavaScript to wait for the page to finish loading before you really manipulate stuff. So the first thing I'm going to write is document add event listener DOM content loaded. And once that content is loaded, I'm going to say we're going to execute a main function. So now inside this function, one thing I like to do is just let's add a console just to give ourselves an idiot check to make sure this is actually firing. And I want to make a variable called cells. And I want to have cells be equal to document get elements by class name cell. So we're going to ask for all the cells, all the things on the page with the class name cell. We're going to use ... to spread it out into a new array. And we can use some for loops to say let row equals 0. While row is less than 3, we will increment row each time. And we'll say let column equal to 0. While column is less than 3, we will increment column each time. And now we can actually get a cell by saying cells.shift the first thing off the front of the array. And we can say cell, not document, my bad over there, add an event listener to that cell. The thing that we're listening for is a click. And now when someone clicks on this, let's make a function called clickCell that receives the cell and the row number and the column number. Here's the cell, here's the row, here's the column. I want to have a console log down here where we can report to ourselves that we clicked on a certain cell. And now I want to say, let's take that cell element that's on the page and modify the text content so that we show the row and the column. So if we refresh our page now, and I'm going to open up our console and make this page a little bit bigger. The first thing we see is that this is actually loaded. That's good. And if we click on something, it says we clicked on 0, 0, clicked on 0, 1, clicked on 0, 2. You can see these coordinates. We've got row 0, row 1, row 2, column 0, column 1, column 2. I am supposed to be changing the text content here. So I'm a little bit... I'm wondering why that doesn't work. Let's diagnose this. I'm going to use the debugger. And I'm going to set a breakpoint here. I've got reference to the cell. I said I have a typo. Text context. Should be text content. So now if I click on these, we're modifying the text content, and it displays these values. So now we know we can click on these cells. What we need to do now is write some JavaScript that actually starts keeping track of the tic-tac-toe game itself. I'm going to go to my file explorer here. I'm going to make a new file called tic-tac-toe game.js. And here's where we're going to create a class that keeps track of the tic-tac-toe game. Let's call it tic-tac-toe game. So I want the tic-tac-toe game to have some properties like the board, properties that keeps track of whether it's X's turn or O's turn, a property that says is the game over or not, and I want some methods where we can do things like make a move on the board. We can check to see if a move is actually valid to prevent things like X overriding an O. And we're going to have a function here that says detect when the game is over. The game is going to be over if someone gets 3 in a row or if the game is drawn, like the board is totally full. And detecting 3 in a row is probably the meatiest part of programming this. So let's get the basic tic-tac-toe game set up. We're going to have a constructor. And when someone makes a tic-tac-toe game, let's say the turn starts as X. And let's represent the board. I want the board to be a 2-dimensional array with a bunch of empty spots in the beginning. And as we make moves on this, we're going to fill this up with X's and O's. And let's see, I want to say this.isGameOver. Well, when the game is first created, that is certainly not true. Now, the simplest thing that we want to build here is a method that allows people to actually manipulate this game. So I'm going to say if someone makes a move, let's have them tell us where they're making the move. And let's update the board so that the place they're making the move is equal to whoever's turn it is. And now, if the turn was something like X, now the turn should be O. Otherwise, we'll do the opposite. It must have been O's turn. So how about the turn is now X's turn again. So now we have this basic class that keeps track of the state of the game. And let's wire it into our HTML. The first thing we should do is actually attach the file. So now in our HTML, we've got a reference to this file. And now in our main JavaScript, when the page is loaded, we can make a reference to the actual game. So we'll say this game is a new Tic-Tac-Toe game. And now, when someone clicks on a cell, we can give them a reference to the game. And inside the click function, we can use the make move function to say that someone is making a move on that row and that column. And now we can update the text content of the cell to show what is on the board inside the game now. And I'm going to make a console log. Let's just say board is now game.board. We'll print that out so we can look at it. Let's see what this looks like. We refresh the page. I have an error here. It says game is not defined. Although I passed in game here, I forgot to add it to the parameters of the function. So let's fix that. If we click here, we can see here the board now, our two-dimensional array has been updated. And when we click on things, we are updating the board, and we're reading what's at the board and updating the text content here to show it. Now, this makes moves, but we sure don't detect game over yet. And even worse, this does not prevent a player from making illegal moves. So it's O's turn right now. In fact, we should update that message here. But O can actually click here and overwrite where someone has actually gone. So we should update this game so that someone can't just make a move anywhere. We should see if a move is valid. So let's say is move valid. We're given a row and a column. And let's say if this dot board at the row and the column is not equal to null, we will return true. Oops. How about if it is empty, we'll return true. Otherwise, we will return false. So now, before someone actually makes a move, we can say if it is a valid move, given the row and the column. Actually, we'll say if it is not a valid move, we can just return. We just ignore what someone told us to do, and if the move is not valid, we won't manipulate the turn at all. So now, if we go X, O, it's going to be X's turn. Now, if O is trying to play over X, you can see in our console that they're trying to make a move, but if they ever click on an X, or even if they click on an O, nothing happens until they actually click on an empty square. Inside of our click cell, we should update this to say it's someone else's turn. So let's get a reference to the prompt. Document get element by ID prompt, and we can say prompt.textContent is game.turn, and we'll make a little apostrophe S turn. So once someone makes a move and we manipulate the game, we'll say it's someone else's turn. We should only really do that if the move was legitimate. So maybe we can say, we can return something here, and we'll say if it was valid. Or how about if it wasn't valid, we'll simply get out of this function. So now, if the move is not valid, we can return false here. We can return successful from here. We could have asked if the move was valid inside this function, but I think it's better to do it inside of a method like make move, just to make it basically impossible for anything to go wrong. So let's see. We click X, it says it's O's turn. O goes here, it's X's turn. I'm trying to click on the O. Nothing happens. You can see down here in the console. Now X goes over here, and it actually updates. So this is looking pretty good. Oh, what do we do next? Let's refer back to our slides. This shows the work we've already done, initializing the engine. This shows the make move function, and we're flipping between the X's and the O's. This is what we've already done, wiring up our click handler to the game, making the move. And we've done some move validation. I added one more thing in here in the notes. It's just a habit from other things that I've done where sometimes it's nice to make sure that you have proper indexes. So we're trying to make sure that someone's not trying to manipulate the game at a row that doesn't exist, like a negative row or beyond the edge of the board. I'm not going to bother setting that up over here, but that could be a nice thing to include. It's a nice idiot check. Now, we only make moves if they actually are valid. Let's get into the meat of this, which is checking wins. So, after every single turn, we should look over the board and see if anyone has got any 3 marks in a row. You can try and solve this yourself, so if you want to do that, you should probably pause the video soon. But I'll give a definition of the problem. You could also kind of treat this as like an interview question. In fact, I've been asked this in interviews at least twice. So the problem is that we have a 3x3 two-dimensional array, and we should write a function that returns true if there's any X's or O's that are 3 in a row. It's nice to break it down in thinking how those can actually occur. They can occur horizontally, or they can occur vertically, and they can also occur diagonally from the top left to the bottom right, or diagonally from the bottom left to the top right. Also consider that the board might be totally empty, like no moves have been made yet, or the array might be partially empty, so maybe some moves have been made, and it's totally possible for the entire board to be completely full without any 3 in a row. That's like a cat's game. And one other thing to think about, I identified it as a bonus here, is we should return information saying which row won. So the simple form of this problem is just returning true if there are any 3 in a row. And it's going to be nice, especially like when you want to add our CSS classes, to not just say that there are 3 in a row. It's important to know which 3 in a row, where they actually are in the grid. So if you want to try and think about this problem yourself, you can pause the video. I'm going to go on and show the way that I like to do it. So you might be tempted to use for loops to iterate over the grid. This seems like a very for loopy problem. You're looking for 3 things vertically, 3 things horizontally, 3 things diagonally in one direction or another diagonal direction. In my opinion, using for loops, it ends up getting a little bit nasty. Once you write it all out, you find out that you're writing for loops to check in one direction. You're writing for loops to check in a totally another direction. And in my opinion, the for loops just they don't get a big win. You write a bunch of them, and there's actually not that many things to check. I'll talk about that more later. That's kind of the thing that earlier in the video I said I wanted to rant about something. I won't rant about it now. Instead, I'm going to show you a pretty straightforward solution. It might feel nasty, but I like how it turns out. So, my simple solution is we write a helper method called check3, and that method takes in what looks like a bunch of parameters, but it takes in the coordinates of everything you're checking. So, row-column pairs, it wants the first spot, and the second spot, and the third spot. And what we'll do is we're going to hard code in an array that keeps track of the different possible winning lines. So this is the 3 ways that you can win by making 3 marks in a row. So this is saying like on row 0, or row 1, or row 2. And you can see this is like the first column, the second column, the third column. So you're consistent across the rows, making 3 in a row. Or this represents making marks on a column up and down. So in this case, we're on row 1 in the first column. In this case, we're in the second row on the first column, or the third row on the first column. So you can see that these groups are just checking, the first column, the second column, the third column. And then here's our diagonals. So this represents the top left corner, this represents the middle square, and this represents the bottom right corner. And here's the bottom left corner, and the middle square, and the top right corner. So if we write a function called check3, and we iterate through these win lines, we're just looking at each of those 3 things, and we're going to see if there's like 3 X's there or 3 O's there. Let me copy this and put it in our program. Let's see. So that is where we define these win lines. And I want a function called check3, where we get a row and a column, and a row and a column, and a row and a column. And we're seeing if these are 3 in a row. What I like to do is I like to say, all right, let's get the first cell, and we'll say this is the board at row 1, row 0, column 0. And we're going to get the second cell and the third cell. And you know what? I think I'm going to call them Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3. Now the logic here is we want to see if they're all equal to X's or O's. We can write something like, how about if Mark 1 equals Mark 2 and Mark 2 equals Mark 3. So this would be true if Mark 1 is X and Mark 2 is X and Mark 3 is X. But we also need to make sure that the marks are not null. So if we had like an empty board and we had like 3 nulls in a row, we don't want to count that as a win. So here, if this is true, we can say, yeah, you know what? There's actually a win there. Otherwise, it is not true. This is a helper function. We need to actually have another function that actually calls this. I'm going to call it detect game over. And I'm going to have a for loop that says for the win line of this dot win lines, and we can say if check 3 of the win line, then we can say, is the game over? Yes. If we've checked every single one, we'll say this dot is game over is false. My cat's here. Hello, Morty. So, let's take this for a spin. We need to figure out when to call detect game over. Well, we should call it after someone makes a move. And I happen to know that we want to do it before we advance the turn. The idea there is that if the game is over, it's not the next person's turn. It's just that's the game, and the game ended on someone's turn. That's going to help us display who won too. So after we manipulate the board, I'm going to run this function called detect game over. And if that is set to true, we eventually will update this is game over flag in our engine here. All right, that means in our main function, after someone clicks on a cell, they've made a move. If the move is not valid, we get out of there. We definitely update what the board looks like, but here we should say, you know what? Let's see if the game is game over. And I'm going to have a function called handle game over. One thing I want to happen in this game over function is get reference to that prompt again. And now we'll just say, how about game over? And now we can say, let's keep a reference to the game here. And we can say game.turn 1. So this would be like game over X1 or game over O1. And we'll do more things inside the handle game over. Eventually we'll highlight the rows. So once we display that message, we're going to return from this function. Or you know what? Maybe we could just make it like an if-else. So if the game's over, we do this. Otherwise, we update the message and say whose turn it is. Let's see how this works. XOXOX. Let's see. The board is now like this. I would have thought maybe I didn't refresh. All right. I'm changing the print statement so we can see the state of the game. Interesting. Looks like something is not totally working with our detect game over. Our reset doesn't work either, so we have to refresh the page. All right, let's try and see what's wrong with our detect game over function. I'm going to open the File Explorer and go to Tic-Tac-Toe game. Let's put a breakpoint on detect game over and over here and here. So we make a move. We go inside detect game over. We say check this. The first thing I'm going to check is... Okay. This looks like our parameters are coming in okay. Our mark is coming in okay. So that should not have a game over. I agree. And it's going to go over a bunch of these win lines. You know what? I think I see something interesting here. We go through the for loop. We check them. If it ever is game over, we set it to true. But we're going to continue through the for loop. And at the very end of that function, we set game over to false. So as soon as we set this to true, we should return. All right. Let's see how this works. XOXO X game over. This says O1. Two things there. I want to put a space. And that's not true. O did not win. So, looks like we're doing a good job detecting game over. We are not doing a good job saying who actually won it. So, the game turn is here. We make a move. Okay, this is, I had mentioned this earlier. We detect the game over. If the game is over, we want to return. So, and let's see, we should still return true. So basically, this is saying that if the game's over, yes, they made a valid move, but we don't want to increment the state of the game to flip from like X to O. I think this is going to be a bit better. There we go. X1. How about O1? That looks good to me. I know there's one other thing wrong with this. Even though the game is over, we can still make moves. So now let's prevent someone from making moves after the game is over. We actually have good infrastructure for this. We can say, is a move valid? Is if there's not a mark on that board. But we can also say, if the game is over, then nothing is a valid move. Because the game is totally over. There's no moves once the game is over. Let's try this. There we go, X1. And now we're trying to click anywhere, and we're not making any moves because it's not valid. This is pretty good. We've done a good job with all this stuff. Displaying some wins. Yeah, let's make this look better. So now that we have the game over, let's add a little bit of CSS to highlight the cells that actually won. A good way to do this is kind of the bonus section of displaying that, of checking for the win, is we can actually save the winning line that we detected had 3 in a row, and now we can get a reference to each of those cells and like add a little CSS class to them that will highlight them and change them to be a different color. This also depends on a function that I skipped over earlier. It talks about getting cells. So we need to be able to get the cells in the HTML in order to actually add this class. So, first of all, let's modify our game over detection to make sure that we save which winning line won. So here in detect game over, I want to add another property that says the winning line was equal to this win line. And I'm going to update our constructor here to say that, there's no winning line in the very beginning. That's not super necessary to create this here, but I think it's proper. It shows some intention. So now, in this main method, we have this handle game over method. And I'm going to make a function called highlight winning line. And we can say game, we will pass in the winning line here. Highlight the winning line. Maybe we can spread that in to actually get these different row and column numbers. And let's get those cells. So we had a good way to refer to these cells when we created these click listeners. What I mean by that is when someone clicked on a cell, we kept track of the row number and the column number. So that comes into this function. We have the row number and the column number. And we're able to feed that into the board and make our marks. But down in this function, we're trying to do the reverse. We have a number for the row and the column, and we need a way to refer to which HTML cell that actually went to. There's two ways to do this. One way to do this is we can add an ID to these cells. Let's start with that. I'm going to say cell.id is equal to cell dash, we'll add the row number, and we'll add another dash, and we'll add a column number. So now we're modifying the HTML so that each of these gets a cell and it has a row and a column number on it. Now down here, we can say document dot get element by ID cell cell dash the row plus a dash plus the column. It's good to put dashes in because even though we have like row numbers that are only going to be like 0, 1, or 2, if you ever had multiple digits, it's nice to separate things with dashes. Otherwise, you couldn't tell the difference between getting something at like row 2, column 34 versus row 23, column 4. Okay. I'm going to say this is cell 1. And let's do that for each of these. Here's cell 2. Here's cell 3. Oh, oops, this is funny. Okay, this is row 0, row 1, row 2. This is column 0, column 1, column 2. So for each of these, I want to say cell 1, let's get a reference to the class list and add something that says it's winning. And in our CSS class here, let's have win. I want the color to be, oh, I had a really pretty color on this one. I forgot which one it was in my solution. Medium sea green. I just love that color. Okay, so if we refresh this, we can make these wins. I applied the color. I'm happy about that, but I guess it should actually be the background color. So now when someone wins, we can actually highlight what row won, and that's just great. Our reset button still doesn't work, but that works pretty well. We can refresh. There's one thing I don't like about this program right now. This is fragile. We're writing this thing to make the ID here, and we're rewriting it here. Well, what if we had screwed up and we used an underscore instead of a dash down here? Let me do it for just like the first one. Let's say I made a typo. Let's refresh. Well, looks like it had trouble reading the class list of that thing because it just couldn't find it. So what I'm saying here is it's bad to write that sort of thing in two different places. People often say redundancy. I like to make a function that's gonna say, how about get cell ID, and we'll take a row and a column. And I'm going to say this thing is called the ID. And the idea here is I'm going to write this once. And now instead of writing it inside, instead of like writing this string manipulation thing, we can use this function and say, give me the cell ID of the row and the column. And same thing in here. We can say get cell ID of like row 0, column 0, row 1, column 1, row 2, column 2. And this is just nice. It's going to prevent errors from like rewriting this little arbitrary string ID that we've made up. So there we go. That works again. I think we can actually make this even a little bit fancier. I don't like the fact that we've got document get element by ID written each time. We can make another helper function called simply get cell and basically move this into there. So we're going to say get this cell. The ID is get cell ID with the row and the column number. So this just makes our program look a lot nicer. So now we can say get cell, row 0, column 0. Oops, it's not 3, that should be a 2. This just makes our code look a little bit better. It's kind of funny too. We've got these. I think we've got some redundancy here as well. I want to make another helper function that says function mark cell. I'm going to call it mark winning cell. So we'll give it a row number and a column number. And let's take some of this text dough over here. Get some of that dough. So we get a row and a column, and we get the cell, and we add the class list win. So now instead of writing all those lines, we can just say mark winning cell, row 0, column 0. Row 1, column 2, row 2, and I think this looks a little bit nicer. So a lot of little functions working together to do some good stuff. There we go. That's a good win. Reset still doesn't work. Oops. It's hard for me to make O win sometimes. That looks good. Let's go ahead and attach this reset button now. So we've got our main method. We've got our click handlers for each cell. Let's go ahead and get the reset button. Reset button equals document get element by ID reset. And now I'm going to say if someone we need to add an event listener. click. If someone clicks on that, we're going to call a reset function. One thing to notice here is you can just give a name of a function. I had to use this arrow syntax here. This is an anonymous function. Because calling this function takes in parameters, we wrap that in an anonymous function so that this stuff isn't called immediately. But in this case, I'm not using any parameters. I'm just giving the name of a function. So I don't have to wrap it in that additional parenthesis with the fat arrow. So here's the reset function. Really what we want to do in this reset function is we want to reset the state of the game for 1. So we're going to have to make a reset function inside that game object. And we want to go through all of the cells here. And we want to reset the X's and the O's back to underscores. And if they have a class list on them with win, we should take that off. So let's write a for loop that says, here's our cell of all of these cells. I'm going to say the text content of the cell is a underscore. And cell.classList, we're going to remove that win if that happens. I also want to take the prompt and reset it to say it's the turn of whoever the game starts with. And we're going to need to reset this in the game class as well, because reset doesn't actually exist yet. Here's kind of a fun trick. Our constructor should just be able to call a function called like this.reset. So, you know, at first we had this, like whenever a game was being created, we set all these things, but if we put that in a reset method, then we can call it and basically reinitialize everything there. It could be possible to recreate the game itself, but the way I've got this wired up, well, I guess we could move all of this stuff into a reset method here. Basically, the problem is that if we made an actual new game, we'd have to like reinitialize all these click handlers because of the reference of the game we're passing into it. Let's see what this looks like. I'm going to make a few turns. I'm going to click reset. It says game is not defined. Oops. Looks like I should wrap this up soon. Okay, back to, I was wrong. Reset needs access to the game. So I'm going to pass the game in as a parameter, and now that a parameter goes into this function, we need to wrap it in an anonymous function. And let's not make the same mistake I made earlier. Let's make sure that the game gets passed as a parameter to that function. All right, let's refresh. I'll make a few moves. I click reset. This looks good. That looks good. We can reset. Yeah, this looks great. And we can't make any turns after. I think the one thing that we need to check for is cats games. So it should be possible to have a cats game. So here the board is full, but no one won. The easiest way, there's two ways you can program this. You could write something that searches over the board and checks each square and makes sure you could like count how many null spaces there are, or you can add a property, something called turns or marks, and count how many legitimate moves you've made. If you count the moves you've made, that's going to save you from having to search over the board every turn. to count how many nulls are left. So it's a little bit more efficient to count how many turns have been made. So I'm going to go back into the main game here, and I'm going to say, let's keep track of how many marks we've made on the board. When someone actually makes a valid move, first we update it on the board, and now we can update how many marks we've made. Now, inside of game over, after we've checked for the win lines, we can say if this dot marks is equal to 9, then the game is over. But the winning line, I'm going to keep it as null. And we can return. I'm just setting it to null just to be explicit. So now it's possible for the game to be over and there not to be a winning line. So now in our handle game over method here, now we should only do this if the game has a winning line. Otherwise, we can make a prompt that says cats. You know, the greatest stage play on earth. Let's see if we can test this real quick. Well, it's I'm laughing at myself for sometimes it's hard to intentionally do a cats game. There we go. There's a cats game. This is great. So I think that's pretty much it. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. This is accounting for draws. This is doing the marks. Testing tic-tac-toe. We want to make sure that you can't override each other, that we detect each thing. So we could write some unit tests. That's a good idea, but that's for another lesson. Resetting the board. Resetting the game state. We've done all this. Here's some bugs that I've found in the past. I found bugs where the player can make moves even after the game was over. We accounted for that already. That was something else I had found. But there you go. That's it. That's how you can make tic-tac-toe in vanilla JavaScript. There's variations on a lot of the stuff I did. Nothing I said in here is absolutely golden. Maybe the last thing on my mind is I don't like every time I wrote prompt here. It's useful to have maybe a function called like set prompt with a message, and you know, now whenever we do something like this, we can have a message and set it like that, and it just makes it easier. Sort of like how we made that get key thing. If we ever wanted to change the way that the prompt div interacted, or like was constructed, we would only have to change that in one place. So here's set prompt. Okay, where else is prompt? Here's another prompt. And I use more variables than maybe other people. Like this, I recognize this is ridiculous, so cats. Usually I set variables like even here. I don't know, it's nice when I look in the debugger. I don't like to do concatenation stuff inside of like a function call. So is that everywhere that we've done it? Yeah, that's about it. Looks like I have a typo there. Let's see. And this still works. So there you have it. There's Tic-Tac-Toe.